welcome to a new episode of something. This will probably get tied into the existing podcast that I do. This may be a spin-off thing. Neil, you and I kind of have no clue what this is going to be yet, so this is like a prototype. You're no stranger to building prototypes of things because you make the movies. I do the easy bit. I sit and watch the movies and then go, I like that one, didn't like that one. Some movies are better than others. Some movies, are forgettable. The one we're going to talk about today, though, is not at all forgettable for me. I'm looking forward to finding out what you think of it. I have no clue what to call this series of conversations that is launching with this one. It is all going to be my memories and my feelings about certain movies. So maybe some sort of movie memories, or you suggested calling it Stuart Bannerman's movie memories, but my rebuttal to that was nobody knows who I am. But
and that's okay. But after they watch this, they will all know who you are. And the point of calling it Stuart Bannerman's movie memories is that you've done well over 600 podcasts over 10 years.
Pretty much, yeah.
And you've done a bunch of press interviews with lots of famous directors and actors. So I think not calling it Stuart Bannerman's movie memories, and this is pressure, would be a sin because you are a brand.
Okay. I'm a cheap brand, but I am a stubborn, persistent brand. I am a brand that has not gone away in over 10 years, and even beyond, way before I decided to put on a headset. Not the same headset, a different headset. I put on a headset and start to do a podcast, which I originally thought was going to be 6 episodes, and I'd get all my stories out. But this is like 680 something times that I've put this headset on, and I've still not run out of stories because things happen, and I rewatch movies and I watch movies, and so I don't think I'm going anywhere.
I don't think so. I consider you the Greggs of the restaurant world, in the sense that Greggs did not disappear, unlike most restaurants during the pandemic situation. You also survived through that and did really well. So I think you've proven to the world that you're here to stay, and you are a permanent fixture in the movie media commentary world.
Until my heart stops pumping or my brain explodes, I will keep doing stuff like this. But this is a little bit different because this is focusing on one movie, and it was a suggestion that you came up with whilst we were on our recent trip to Scotland in a car. Enough said about that. Next, get in there, it's better. And you wanted to do these deep dives into movies, and for me, where better to start than my ultimate favorite movie of all time, Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Yes, that's a movie I actually saw in the cinema when it first came out. And I remember seeing, I think, during the screening of Star Wars, at the time I was living in Australia, they started showing a little documentary, as they used to do, before movies. They did have a short film and a trailer and another little promo piece. They showed this really cool promo piece about an upcoming UFO film, which got me intrigued. So I think it was called Watch the Skies or something. And I believe it's now on the Blu-ray. They've released it, to the public anyway. But I remember just staring at the poster in the Hoyt's Theatre in Brisbane, Australia, and just being enamored by what the hell this poster was about. Close Encounters of the First Kind, was, I guess, what you see a UFO. Close Encounters of the Second Kind was physical evidence, and Close Encounters of the Third Kind was contact. And I was going, this is incredible. I thought it was more of a documentary, to be honest, than a movie.
So would you have seen it in 1977 when it came out? Because it is a 1977 film. Here in the UK, we didn't get it until like March or April 1978. So all these people came out the same year as Star Wars. My brain goes, no, it didn't, because I would remember that. But in the UK, it didn't. We got it quite a few months after.
To be honest, Australia, I'm British myself, but I moved to Australia when I was young. Australia got things even later than the UK. So I would say it's probably the middle of 78, or maybe a little bit later than, 78. And at this point, I think I was about the age of 10 or 11. and I was allowed to see movies by myself. So this was one I got to see alone.
So I was 7 when in 1978 when it came out. I don't want to keep reminding everybody that the film came out in different years, so I'll sort of class it as a 77 film. I was 7. I don't remember seeing it in the cinema. I know I did, because then a couple of years later when the special edition came out, and I did go to the cinema and see that as a 9-year-old, I remember thinking, I'm sure there's bits missing. I'm sure there's stuff in this film, because I can remember him going crazy and throwing dirt through the windows and building all this thing. But in the special edition, that's a kind of a shorter sequence. And it really annoyed me for many, many years. I'm like, there is other stuff. And then when eventually the director's cut came out, and then it had all the sequences in other than that ending, which we'll get on about. It had all this extra stuff in it. It had the scene with Carl Weathers. It had I saw a Bigfoot once. His foot was this big. And I'm like, I knew I'd seen all that sort of stuff, but it really annoyed me for quite a few years because there was no internet to go and look this up. Go, why is there deleted scenes? And there was nothing. You were like, I just remember seeing something. So I know that I would have seen it originally on its theatrical run and then again on the special edition when it came out in 1980.
Yeah. For me, I saw the movie, and then, being the person I was, I got the comic book and I got the photo novel. And so
I have the photo novel in a box somewhere. It's perfect condition.
Oh, man, I wish I had one of those. It's my only way to relive the movie because I wanted to rewatch it. I remember reading the comic and seeing the line about this old man who said he saw Bigfoot once. And it blew my mind because I was more than UFOs. I was a Bigfoot freak, shall we say. I was obsessed with Bigfoot, because of, the fear of it, shall we say. And it just like, is there a connection between UFOs and Bigfoot? And I was of an age where I thought it was all real. Prior to that, the neighbor's mum, a few houses up, she told me in secret about, because I was fascinated with UFOs and everything. She told me about this man in the USA who was in contact with the aliens, and all these believers are meant to meet on a hill one day, and we'll all go and meet the aliens, and we'll basically go up in their spaceship. And this was one of those, it was one of those religions that I think they suicided later, Heaven's Gate. It was either Heaven's Gate or Raelians. It was one of the two. They both believed in the religion of science, of flying saucers. And I was like, this is real. You've got to take me to this place. We've got to get to America and see and find this man and see these UFOs. Had that religious cult been around me, had I been in the USA, I would have probably sought this man out and joined his religion of, his cult of UFO believing. And perhaps I would have suicided by now, but that's another story.
That's one of those things you can look back at and go, would I have drunk Kool-Aid if I'd have been asked? I don't. And you will never know because you can't go back and find that out. But I'm glad you didn't go, and I'm glad you didn't drink the Kool-Aid. Otherwise, I would not be having this conversation with you now.
I was a true believer, though, at one point, a true believer, starting with believing in UFOs. And then I became a true believer in Jesus. And I was really committed. But then I saw through it all.
I'm still a true believer in UFOs and aliens, and I do believe that a lot of that will tie into religion as well. I mean, you look, and I'm not a churchgoer, and I'm not an expert on Bibles or anything like that, but you hear some of the biblical stories, and you go, that would be so easy to tie into an alien. A beam of light came from the sky, and Jesus walked out of it. You go, well, beam of light from the sky, that's an easy one. Somebody walked out of it. I could probably do that one. He walked on water. Yeah, probably work that one out as well. So there is a lot of potential tie-ins, which kind of upsets a lot of religious people sometimes. It's one of those things you've got to pick and choose when you go, was Jesus an alien? Or they get a little bit upset with you. But who knows? It's possible.
I think that was even a line from Close Encounters.
I think there was Einstein was one of them.
Oh, that's
Einstein was right. Oh, he was probably one
Einstein
of them.
Was
so
one
that's
of them.
the line. So no offense to Einstein, but yeah, well.
Watching some of the makings of that line was originally going to be Truffaut's line. for those who don't know, he's the French dude who was actually a film director who'd made some of the greatest, French new wave films that basically Spielberg copied off a little bit. Martin Scorsese completely ripped off many of his scenes, in his films, blatantly. So he was like a god film director. I guess he was like the David Lynch of the day or something. He was artistically superior to what the Americans consider themselves to be. So there's like, can Mr. Truffaut be in this movie? And originally he had the line, Einstein was probably one of them or something. And during the shoot, Spielberg gave the line to another actor. And Francis Truffaut said, well, now I know how it feels when I do that to actors. He was very upset that he lost his line.
And I think it's Truffaut had spent 6 months just agonizing over this line, going, can I get it right? Can I get it right? Can I get it right? And he spoke to Bob Balaban about it. And it's like, I'm really nervous about this line. And then obviously on the day of shooting or whatever, it's like, yeah, just that other guy could do it. Truffaut's like, huh? So, yeah, interesting.
So could I ask you, Stuart, what scene in Close Encounters resonates with you the most?
It's none of the special effects stuff. There's surprisingly less special effects in the film than I think there would be if the film came out nowadays. I loved the whole Roy Neary knowing something. It's on the tip of his tongue. He knows what he's supposed to be heading for, but he doesn't quite know what it is. And he feels like he's cracking up. All of those scenes, which run for quite a chunk of the film, it's like, I know what that is, but I don't know what it is. But I do, but I don't. And it's just driving him insane. So it's that whole segment of the film that I absolutely love. I suppose the easy answer is Mothership going behind Devil's Tower type thing, but no, it's the psychology of it.
Interesting. Probably the mothership stuff at night. The first thing I think of, actually, if you see you got a book behind you, I see, of Close Encounters. Probably that region, that type of image is the first thing I think of. But then I saw an interview with Spielberg where he said for him, the first thing he thinks about is the little boy opening the door and outside is a bright orange light. And Spielberg, in the day when he made this movie, he was very young. I'm guessing 28, 29, Yeah. Well, he was very young, and I know his problem. He was in a situation where he was this young dude in an adult's world, and I was directing at the age of 21, so I had people give me so much crap because of it. People, my crew were all older than me, and they were just like talking down to me half the time, and I just said, you just ignore it. So I kind of think Close Encounters is a bit of Spielberg's soul, because he was a young man in an adult's world and being talked down to a lot and everything else. So the character we all respond to the most is Roy Neary, because if you look at Roy Neary, and from a film analyst point of view, when you see Roy Neary, the first thing you see about him, or even before you see him, you hear the wish, When You Wish Upon a Star music coming out of a toy or something, and then they show Roy's world, and it starts out in his den with a train set, with a toy train set, and then it goes on to show that he's kind of not really the man of the house, he's the boy of the house. Then he goes to work, and the most interesting scene is when he's in that power station place and everything's green and bland. If you have a look, he's the only one wearing a red shirt, and he stands out like a little lollipop, I mean, he pops in that scene, and wherever you look, you're drawn to him because he's got the red shirt. And so that's all you see is Roy Neary, and he doesn't even engage with the adults in the same way. He's just waiting to go off and do his little mission, his go and investigate stuff. And he does it even from a youthful perspective, everything he does. He's a little bit insolent and all that. And he's just, oh my God, look at that, I saw a UFO. That's always his character. But you see him in the red shirt, and I think that's the point of Spielberg saying, this is me at this time of my life, surrounded by all these adults, and they're all doing their business. And meanwhile, I'm just trying to find the wonder of being a child. I've lost the childhood thing a little bit. I'm trying to recapture that childhood thing. So Spielberg is Roy Neary, as far as I'm concerned.
The other interesting...
again in Jaws as well, I think Spielberg was Matt Hooper, also played by Richard Dreyfuss in Jaws.
Yeah. Or you don't think he was the shark? I guess the shark was the studio, wasn't it?
The shark was definitely the studio and probably the producers chasing him down for the budget. But if you look into some of the casting ideas, originally it wasn't going to be Richard Dreyfuss because he'd already used Richard Dreyfuss, and Spielberg and Richard were fine. He didn't really think of putting him in the film, and it was Richard Dreyfuss's persistence and hearing all these decisions and all the conversations that Spielberg was having about the film when he's like, I really want this role. And it was him putting his head around the door and saying to Spielberg, you don't need an Al Pacino, you don't need a Dustin Hoffman, you need a child to play this role. And apparently that was when Spielberg went, good idea, you've got it. And Richard Dreyfuss, whilst he isn't a child, he does have, as you'd mentioned, that very childlike look to his face, which to me is no more showcased than in the scene when he takes his wife back up to the hill to see the UFOs, and she's like, I'm just going to kiss you just to make you forget about what's up there and just focus on me. And his eyes open mid-kiss while he's in a very childlike way.
Yeah, it's so true. By the way, do you know who originally Spielberg wanted for Roy Neary?
Steve McQueen.
Why did Steve McQueen not get the role? Or why did he?
Well, Steve McQueen didn't want it though, did he? He sent the script to Steve McQueen. Mm-hmm. Steve McQueen read it, contacted Spielberg, and went, "That is amazing, but I don't want to do it." So Spielberg's like, "Why?" And Steve McQueen says, "I would really, really struggle to cry on camera. I just won't be able to do it." So Spielberg's like, "It's fine. I'll cut the bit out where you cry on camera." And Steve McQueen went, "No, don't cut that part out. That's the bit that made me cry whilst reading the script. Do not cut that part out." So that's why McQueen didn't end up being in the film.
It would have been probably not as good a film because Steve McQueen can be very controlling as well. And he probably would have walked all over Spielberg. My favorite story was when they were discussing it, was he met Steve McQueen at a bar. I guess it was somewhere in Malibu or somewhere, I don't know where. And he had to, drink, alcohol along with Steve McQueen, and Spielberg didn't drink alcohol. So it would have been hilarious just to watch that, because you can imagine how nervous Spielberg would have been. I mean, I tell you something funny. I found some audio of me directing, what is his name? Paul Darrow from Blake 7. He did some audio for me in 2003. I was listening through it the other day. You can hear me talking and directing him in the audio. And I just sound like a little boy, with this. And I just like, I guess I was probably 30 at the time. And I was, the only time I've ever been starstruck was meeting him. And so I could hear it in my voice, I was like, oh my goodness. And I guess that's probably how Spielberg was. He was probably just a little sheepish,
There's a really good book which is written by the producer of Close Encounters, Julia Phillips. And she wrote a book many, many years ago called You'll Never Eat Lunch in This Town Again. And it's all about her journey through Hollywood. So all about the sting. And it does tie into a lot of Close Encounters as well. And Spielberg was the person who would sit in the corner of the room during a party. He was the person that would never get stoned and never drink alcohol. And so he was kind of the shy kid.
Yeah. I was probably the same. Am I guessing you were similar to that?
Yeah, I just don't go to parties. It's like, no, I'm good, thanks. If the music's too loud and I can't have a conversation, I'm all right. I'm good, thanks. I'll skip it.
Yeah, I've done some very odd things when I've had some alcohol, and it's on camera, unfortunately. So, but I it's that's something we don't talk about.
But no, I think one thing that a lot of people forget as well is when you and I were rewatching Close Encounters after we'd seen it in the theaters and stuff, we would probably have seen the pan and scan versions. There was no widescreen version for many, many years. I don't know what year it came out, but I would probably say the 90s.
It's definitely a widescreen film. The interesting thing was Douglas Trumbull, who did the VFX, spoke about the process of it, which I found fascinating. they were trying to be as, go away from Star Wars as much as possible because they'd just done that sort of white model kit bashing look. And, they can't, it was the original lens flare thing. But interesting, they are real lens flares. That's a very interesting point of what they were doing. But he shot every time there was a VFX shot, he always shot those scenes. It was on, I think it was 65mm film. So he could then composite in the VFX, blend it together. So when you spit it out to 35mm, it wouldn't change in quality. And in fact, you can kind of tell. I was watching it the other day and I was like, wow, that scene's a little bit clearer than the other scenes, and the lens looks a little sharper. And that's because they were shooting on a larger format film. And it's like, obviously there's a VFX shot going to be coming up here. So they shot those sequences like people now shoot on IMAX for certain things. They shot specifically on some of the formats to make the VFX look good. And the VFX, for the most part, just still to this day look incredible, which is odd because every time you throw a lens flare in a VFX shot, it looks dated. Yes, I am guilty of that more than most people should be. I was doing that in the year 2003, so, don't really ever want to see another lens flare ever again on camera if I can avoid it. But back in the day when they used real textures, real models, real lens flares, real film, composited politely and planned properly, that movie is still picture perfect.
When Steven Spielberg
it still holds
made
up.
Jaws,
It really does. I watched the
reports of
director's
shark
cut
attacks
version
increased
today.
by
I've
the
watched all three
thousands,
versions
and people began
over
to
like the
approach
past
the
week,
beach
so
with
it's
caution and
stuff.
even with fear.
I think one thing that does annoy me, well, there's two things that annoy me about
with
Close
Close
Encounters of the Third Kind, is I don't like the special edition ending. Mm-hmm. I've never been a fan of being able to see what was inside the mothership, because it's not the audience that's going inside the mothership, it's Roy Neary that goes in there, and it's him alone that should be able to see what goes in there, the way the theatrical version and the director's cut end. And also the fact there isn't one version that has everything in. That drives me insane. So I want to watch just the long one. Show me that.
You want the kitchen sink version, don't you?
I want the kitchen sink version. I mean, the director's cut one is nearly that, but there's still stuff missing. It doesn't show the part when he goes into work with the red shirt that you mentioned in the director's cut.
Oh, that's interesting. Wasn't aware of that. And I consider that really, supreme filmmaking, because that whole red shirt thing, he revisited that in Schindler's List. So there's nothing wrong with the concept. It's interesting that he brought that concept back again. Spielberg and the color red, they have an interesting relationship, let's just say.
Yeah, a bit like Francis Ford Coppola and the color orange. if you watch the Godfather movie.
Or dirty brown.
Yes, pretty much. But yeah, there isn't a kitchen sink version. I mean, the director's cut's 137 minutes, so that is as long a version as you'll get without, making your own version, so to speak. The special edition is shorter than the theatrical. It's because stuff was put in and then stuff was taken out, and so it's somewhat confusing. But on the plus side, it means every 6 months you just watch a different version, and you're like, oh yeah, you get a slightly different experience rather than just watching the same film over and over again.
And a funny story is, when Spielberg was young and hanging around the studio, sneaking into the studio, he snuck onto Alfred Hitchcock's set and tried to talk to the master. And Hitchcock, I believe, kicked him out of the studio, which I thought was amazing, because it's like, the old world, the new world encroaching on the old world, and the old world doesn't want the new world, the new wave of, classic 70s directors. And, it's just it was the attitude of the time, but he still heavily borrowed from Hitchcock in Close Encounter. I mean, it's basically a masterclass of Alfred Hitchcock movie making, which I find absolutely wonderful.
And nowadays people will borrow from Spielberg, so it's just passing the baton, isn't it?
Yeah, that bugs me when people do that.
Why?
I mean, I was guilty of that occasionally, because that's what you do when you're young. And you got to find your own voice. But I remember, this is a weird story. Okay, so back when I was a born-again Christian, I was in a church, And, it was all about outreach and bringing more people to Christ and everything else. And, I wanted to be a Christian musician at one point because I thought, even though I'm not musical, I thought that was a great way to bring people in. So my idea was to take, AC/DC songs or hard rock songs or whatever and rewrite the words to make them Christian focused to bring people in. So you change the words. Really horrible thing to do when you think about it. But that's, I wanted to do things like that to bring people to Christ. And there was this guy, he was from the Solomon Islands. I never forget this guy, really good looking, tall, strong dude, really confident. He looked at me one day, he said, Neil, that's a really terrible idea. We as Christians should be doing we should be trying to be original and not steal from the world. And we should be completely original. And at that moment, it completely transformed my life in the sense that I realized that imitating others to get whatever you want to get is a sin, in a creative sin, shall we say, and to try to find your own path and be as original as possible. That was a big learning phase for me. Nothing to do with the Jesus stuff. I walked away from the Jesus stuff probably 2 years after that. But that was my last attempt at, trying to bring souls to Christ and have a ministry and everything. But
didn't you make a love letter to War of the Worlds with Alien Dawn, which was borrowing from the H.G. Wells source material rather than any movie version?
Well, that's an interesting point. It was actually, when we shot it, it was called The War of the Worlds. H.G. Wells is The War of the Worlds. And it was meant to be that. And the distributor said, no, nobody wants another War of the Worlds movie. Were they wrong? And it was meant to be a found footage version of The War of the Worlds, which kind of went a little bit more polished than that because I didn't want to go that route too much, but it was the original concept. And it was like, let's make it more interesting. So it was meant to be War of the Worlds. In 100%. I mean, it opens with Mars. It has all the tropes, even the red weed and everything. But it just wasn't called The War of the Worlds because of the distributors. So when I re-released that, I might rename it something. I was happy not calling it War of the Worlds in some way, though, because it meant I could do The War of the Worlds later on as a proper period piece film, which I'm currently pitching around the place, but nobody wants to do that.
I think, I'm sure it was Brian Blessed. He's been trying to do that for years, actually set it back when the book itself was happening in the Victorian times. Yeah, he's been trying for many, many years to try and get that done.
Wow. I have no idea. Well, that's interesting. Maybe I should pay him a visit.
Hello, Neil. Or whatever a Brian Blessed voice is.
Oh, he wouldn't be hard to get to, to be honest, if that was the case. I've got producer friends who would probably throw money at that if it was done the right way. Again, if I was going to do that film myself, having everything I learned a lot from Close Encounters, I would do everything, live action, physical. And again, not to toot my own trumpet, but I actually have my latest television series called The Time War. One of the main character, Diane, in The Time War, she is an avid H.G. Wells fan, reads the book out loud at one point and dreams of Martian tripods. And at the end of it, a version of her builds giant walking tripods. And we actually did that with a physical giant Martian tripod head thing and everything, So I've already played with that a bit and it looks so good. It's so much better than CG, let me tell you.
Practical always is, I think.
Yeah.
It really is. I mean, I rewatched the first Avatar a few weeks ago in advance of watching the second one. And some of that's like, oof. And yet I watched Close Encounters, which was decades before Avatar. And I'm like, still looks great. So practical always will for me anyway.
Yeah.
Stand the test of time longer than any CGI does.
And as a guy who's done a lot of CGI, starting in the early 2000s, I guess, very early 2000s, and going all the way to 2012 when I did a full green screen film. And then I started withdrawing from that because I realized it had gone too far. I don't think every director has gone that far, with things. There's the guy who did iRobot. I forget his name, director guy. Yeah, he did a great film with Dark City, and that still holds up. But if you look at iRobot, it's a good film, but it's very cartoony in the look. And I could say the same about my own films, and it offends me deeply, to the point where I'm actually going back to remake some of the the VFX, and then we come back to Close Encounters, which still looks like a perfect film.
It does. The 70s is, and I saw a lot of the 70s films, some of them when they came out, but some of them in the early 80s. To me, the 70s is still my favorite decade for film. You've got your Alien, you've got your Exorcist, you've got your French Connection, you've got your Star Wars, Close Encounters, Superman the movie, all these sort of just The Omen, all these classic films that I have behind me, which anybody who's listening to this on audio can't see, but my top 100 films of all time, and you look at them, there's a lot of the 70s films in there. I clearly wasn't watching The Omen when I was 5 years old at the cinema, but I did see it later on, and it's like, I just love the 70s movies, and Close Encounters is definitely the number one of those movies because it's my favorite film ever. So
yeah, I've become that person as well. I got out of the 80s hating the 70s. It was 80s were cool. And they did bring some great films, like I guess Alien was an 80s film for me.
Blade Runner, The Thing, Ghostbusters, Gremlins,
exactly.
Indiana Jones trilogy, a whole bunch of them.
Yeah, and do they beautifully stand up, perfectly to this day. Whereas anything, and I mean, honestly, you go look at a film from 95 with CGI onwards, and it's a pile of crap, visually. I mean, sometimes they do it right, sometimes it looks good, but it generally is not very good. And that really upsets me personally, because I put so much effort into learning 3D and CG and stuff, and doing the VFX, and it's painful. It's absolutely painful. So, for me, and I mean, this is again the lesson from Close Encounters is, with my next film, I'm banning green screen wherever possible, and which is not, as much as possible. I'm banning anything. I'm not going to have anything but physical spaceships and physical this and that, and I don't want to do any enhancements. It's all got to be done in camera. It took me that long to learn those lessons from Star Wars and Close Encounters and Blade Runner and everything else. That being said, I mean, okay, you go look at films like Blade Runner 2049. That looks beautiful. I think that'll hold up. Dune will probably hold up, the new Dune, not the original. I love the original.
I've seen the original one so many times, I still don't know what's going on half the time. I'm like, I don't know, I guess it's like sandworms and stuff, and
Yeah, it takes a few views, but what blew my mind on the original Dune was the extended cut, the extended television cut, which explained everything.
It's MIDI cut. Yep, David Lynch doesn't even like that cut.
He doesn't, but it shows you what could have been had they given him a free hand, with the filmmaking part of it. And I wish that. I mean, I know people who know David Lynch. I would just sit him down and say, dude, just go to the De Laurentiis family and say, this is what I want to do. Let me produce it, and we will produce the ultimate director's cut, and shoot extra scenes if we need to. It's not hard to do. Probably looking at an investment of, $5 million, maybe 10 million with fees to the director and stuff. But it would be a great thing to do. I don't think they'll do it.
I don't think David Lynch would. I don't think David Lynch knows what he's doing half the time. I'm not convinced. I like David Lynch films, but I don't think he knows what he's doing half the time with some of these films. And the people who really love David Lynch go, "Oh, he's a genius. I totally understand it." No, you don't, because I don't think David Lynch does. Even though I do like David Lynch films.
But I am that person.
You are that person. No, I know what. Well, what's he trying to do then? I can't possibly explain it to you.
I
just move on.
I can tell you what he was doing with his first film.
Yeah, too much coffee is what he was doing.
Well, he just had a baby, so it was the horror of having a child, and I related to it. That creature thing was basically how he looked upon it, his child in a weird way.
Annette was pregnant at the time that she saw And she didn't see it when it originally came out, but she was pregnant with her first child, and then she saw Eraserhead for the first time, and for weeks and months she was convinced that that's what she was going to give birth to. It gave her nightmares, really freaked her out.
Yeah,
thanks, David Lynch.
Yeah, and that's where he was at. And that is back to Spielberg. Where was Spielberg at when he made Close Encounters? You could see, he's very honest. He said he was so, again with the interviews, he was so, what's the word? Idealistic in the world. And, to him, when you open that little boy opens the door, it's a horror scene, but to him, it was an awakening of the child to see the world. And it was like, man, what a great perspective he had. And by the way, I got to talk about the music for a second.
The music, I love John Williams. And I think if you take the John Williams music and you listen to it within the film, it's perfect. It's brilliant, and it works 100%. The Close Encounters soundtrack, though, is not one of these where you go, I'll just put the CD on while I'm making my Sunday lunch and listen to it. I don't think it works that well that way, but within the film itself, perfect.
Well, and it's two parts to it. There's the chaotic stuff and the perfect musical stuff. And I've got a very interesting relationship with the music. For me, it was that and The Wrath of Khan were my two favorite soundtracks of my life when I was young. The reason Close Encounters was so good to me was, I guess I was year 9 or 10 in high school. We had to start doing, theater projects and things like that. And I remember I was really good at mime. I know, don't laugh. All that whole, Yeah, please do. No judgment, please. I was a really nerdy kid. So what I did is I took the Close Encounters soundtrack, but I took that scary stuff, the really eerie, creepy part, the horror film part of the soundtrack, and I did a mime to it, a big mime performance in front of the class or the school. Oh no, seriously. But I had the music cranked, and I scared the living daylights out of some of the people in the school because the music they'd never heard. And I was doing this stuff where I was running and I was, doing the whole stuck in a box, and I got out of the box and I went for a run, but all in mime, of course. But, I knew my eyes were like big and everything. And I was really living the moment because of that. And I had a massive impact on people. They were chilled to the bone because of my Close Encounters mime performance, which is kind of weird because I had no talent to do anything nice or anything else. But when it came to scaring people, that was my secret talent. Thanks to John Williams. And that's, that music for me was if you listen to it broken down, I personally would say I consider it his best soundtrack personally, but it's not an Interstellar.
It's not Interstellar or an Oppenheimer or something like that where you could just go. I mean, I listened to the Oppenheimer score before I saw Oppenheimer, the movie, and I love the music for the music's sake. Close Encounters, I've barely listened to the soundtrack on CD, which I do have somewhere, isolated from me watching the film. I think and I guess a lot of film soundtracks are like that. They're meant to be the film soundtrack, not designed to play on a CD in your house or on your way to work or something. So,
yeah, for me, the music is a character in the film. It paints such a picture, and you can't think of Close Encounters without the opening music. It's like, oh my God. I remember hearing that at the cinema the first time, and they cranked it up, and it blew my mind. All of it blew my mind. So yeah, I just the whole thing, like da 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 da. That's 5 notes of music, which is an unnatural amount of music for melody. We all know it now. But he chose that because it was not a musical complete melody. It was a kind of an oddity.
He wanted it to be like a doorbell, didn't he?
Yeah.
And it kind of works. But I mean, you could sit anywhere in a crowd and go, "Du-du-du-du-du," and 90% of people will go, I know that. And that, like you said, it's 5 notes, but you do them in that order, and they're like, oh yeah, I know what that's from.
Yeah. But at the time, aliens communicating through music is a bizarre situation.
Yeah.
Bizarre.
But it worked. I think there are a few things bizarre about the film. I mean, the whole mothership coming out of the ground above Devil's Tower, you're like, where's that hiding? And Spielberg, even in the making of, touches upon that. He's like, I know it wasn't dug in a hole, but kind of looked cool. It's just like, fine, I'll cut you some slack on that. But I think one of the things that I noticed about Close Encounters when I watched it very early age, I mean, I've seen Jaws. I didn't feel the need after watching Jaws to I mean, there wasn't an internet, but to go do some research to find out whether the Kittner boy was a real case and whether he really was killed by a shark. However, after watching Close Encounters, you go, what is this Flight 19? Was that real? Kind of feels like Close Encounters feels like a very real film, even though we know we're watching a movie because it's got Richard Dreyfuss in it. Carl Weathers is in it if you watch that version of the film. So we know it's a movie because it's written and directed by Steven Spielberg. But it still feels very real. In the same way, I think if there's a modern comparison to Close Encounters, I think it's Robert Zemeckis' Contact.
I was going to say that. Interesting statement. They're a good pairing. They're a good pairing. Like a wine and cheese.
Yes. And again, with Contact, it's not, I mean, there are a lot of visual effects and stuff in it, but they're not special effects sequences. They are just clever ways of filmmaking that most of the audience won't even realize is a visual effect or whatever. And then obviously later on, you do get the special effects heavy stuff. But that too feels like a real thing. I'm watching a perfectly realistic storyline. I just believe 100%. I'm in.
Yeah, I think that Spielberg's trick was using in the dialogue people talking over each other, which happens in real life. People are chattering. Remember my father watching the film and saying, oh, this is so confusing. They're talking over each other all the time. But that was the point. It was a chatter to try to make it look like real world. And, not a very good thing to do from a filmmaking perspective. But it was genius because of that exact same reason, because it just put you in a mood. The words weren't real in the sense that you weren't supposed to listen to the words. You were supposed to listen to the mood of everything. And that was, like you said, that was a documentary.
There was, obviously, Columbia were like very happy because they made a lot of money off Close Encounters in its run, because this was back in a time, not nowadays, where films are gone from movie theaters in 3 weeks. This thing ran for ages. So they then did the special edition, which was a couple of years later. I think they made an extra 16, 17 million, which at the time was quite a lot of money for a small investment on it.
Well, I think they saved the company from bankruptcy.
It
allowed Spielberg to do other films or something.
So they're like, well, we want another one. And Spielberg was like, I don't really want to do sequels, because he didn't do Jaws 2. He's like, you know what? I don't want to do that. I don't mind Jaws 2. I think it's fine. But he didn't really have a lot to do with that. But there were talks of a sequel, and a sequel was not necessarily written, but there was a storyline. It was going to be called Watch the Skies, which was the original title for the original Close Encounters before it became Close Encounters of the Third Kind. So Watch the Skies was also the tagline for Close Encounters. So the sequel never happened, but the sequel did end up happening in the form of 2 movies. Can you name the 2 movies that ended up becoming sort of offspring of the original Close Encounters sequel idea? E.T. was one of them. The other one was Poltergeist.
Really?
Yes.
Poltergeist.
The original plan of Poltergeist, aka Watch the Skies, was that 11 aliens, so these were scientists, but they were, from above, came down to Earth, and they were like, well, we need to examine stuff. We need to check out all these life forms on planet Earth. Let's look at the cows. Let's look at the cats. Let's look at the dogs. Let's look at humans. And they ended up sort of terrorizing this family that were living in a neighborhood. And if you look at Poltergeist, it is a family that lives in a neighborhood. That neighborhood kind of looks like the same family that lives in E.T. neighborhood. You could probably, I don't know if it's the same estate, but kind of looks similar. And it became Poltergeist. So that's where Poltergeist came from. It was from the seeds of the original plans for a Close Encounters of the Third Kind follow-up.
Well, you just blew my mind.
There you go. Yeah.
Huh.
Man, it'd be good to do a deep dive on Poltergeist now, wouldn't it?
It would, yeah. And obviously when Toby Hooper came on board to direct Poltergeist, he's like, it's going to be about poltergeists. So the whole thing just became Toby Hooper's Poltergeist. But originally the plans were that was going to be a follow-up to Close Encounters.
Wow.
So, and that would have happened pretty quick, I think, because Poltergeist is 1982.
Yeah.
E.T. is also 1982. And we had the special edition of Close Encounters in 1980. So there's only a 2-year gap from special edition coming out to Poltergeist and E.T. coming out. So there must have been a lot going on in 1981, before these two films went into production.
Interesting. See, I would have, I guess it was the alien vibe. People wanted more creatures and stuff. I mean, that continues to this day. I hate to say it. I've had 2 of my films renamed with the word alien in it by distributors. So I guess that's, until we saw Close Encounters, the concept of the Greys really didn't come to the forefront of everything, and you can see how culture has changed by Close Encounters. The grey alien thing really came to vogue after that, popularized by Whitley Strieber and stuff. But you kind of make you wonder how much he got from Close Encounters.
But also, I think before Close Encounters, most of the films involving aliens were aliens are bad. They are coming here to kill us. Whereas Close Encounters is, as far as I know, the first one when it's like, they're coming here, not going to kill you. They are benevolent, they're quite friendly, and they just wish to communicate. And then from there on, you do get your ETs, and, you jump forward even a bit more, you get Mac and Me, and, things like that.
Yeah, that's a classic.
No, it's really not.
So I guess the message is, aliens are here to come to sing to you, and then aliens are here to give you pot plants.
Apparently. And
what happened to Mac and Me? I never saw that. I just saw that clip of the boy in the wheelchair.
Yeah, it's not a good film. ET film, but we'll give you like $50 or whatever. But it has its fan base. Does Mac and Me? I'm just not one of them.
I've been in that position, you see, so I never feel, I always feel bad for those people. It's that exact situation has happened to me. I got to tell you a little spoiler. I was supposed to do a Blue Beetle movie.
Were you?
Mm-hmm.
Luckily you didn't, because people don't like the DC universe at the minute, do they? So.
Well, there's a part of the Blue Beetle is in public domain, and this is a few years ago, and they wanted me to do a Blue Beetle movie, and I read the comic, and I thought, man, he's just a drug user.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously, he's like, he gets jacked up on some chemical and becomes a badass, and it's like, it's basically a movie about a crackhead who dresses like a Blue Beetle, in my opinion. That's the movie I would have made, but they didn't want that. They wanted a polished superhero movie, so I actually walked away.
Well, you can find out what the Blue Beetle movie's like in a month or two when it comes out, and I'm sure the internet will be pounding it with hammers, as they generally do with most films. So what would you think if Close Encounters came out now? I mean, I think it'd be very different. I think it would be insanely effects driven. There would be you wouldn't get that beginning 20 minutes or whatever before any visual effects.
No. Well, the problem is Close Encounters has affected so many other movies like Independence Day and everything else. And even V, you can see the fingers, extending into so many movies. So it'd be hard to really say what it would be. But if they did a remake, I guess.
Oh, no, don't even joke about that.
Well, think about Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skull. That was, I might say it's a sequel, but it could have been you could treat that as a prequel in a weird way, I don't think it would work unless you went back and did it totally for, dramatic effect like they did originally. But then it would not end up in the cinema. It'd end up on streaming. Maybe a bit like that Predator film on Hulu,
Which is a great film. Go watch Prey. It is coming out on disc, I believe. So
good.
That's a good thing. But
yeah,
I think from Close Encounters onwards, this little kid, sort of, me, saw the film in the theater. Can't really remember it in the theater, but I saw the special edition, which I do remember. I've owned the film on VHS and various DVD editions over the years. I never ever tire of it. It did fuel my interest in the whole UFO conspiracy stuff. The amount of films that I've seen over the years that are sort of, I guess, like cousins to Close Encounters, Fire in the Sky, Communion, Intruders with Richard Crenna, Hangar 18, even things like Capricorn 1, which is kind of loosely typed.
Yeah,
but
I can see that relationship.
Yeah. But I will pretty much gravitate towards any film. There are some terrible ones. Out the Fourth Kind, I think, is one that springs to mind when I'm like, that's not good. But generally, I will watch them all. And Spielberg went back to that sort of world in the TV series Taken, if you've ever seen that, which was like a 10-part TV show.
Maybe you could consider that some form of a sequel.
But not Poltergeist is the sequel to Close Encounters.
Wow,
sort of.
My mind.
I think a lot of people would have said, "Oh, Gremlins." No, not Gremlins. Poltergeist.
Yeah.
So it's good, but it's a film I never ever tire of rewatching, and even watching 3 different versions in the past week, I wasn't like, oh, another version. I loved it. Still works for me.
It gripped me again when I watched it, in that 70s vibe. But I consider it a masterclass in filmmaking, and Spielberg was not a master in this time, but he was influenced by the masters, and somehow he channeled the right energy to create a work of art. And I mean, that is so rare in this world to be able to do that. That's a rare talent. I don't have that talent. My talent lies elsewhere, but obviously, like, we all have our talents, but Spielberg has the ability to take an idea and a concept and tune into what it is and find the core element of what it is. I don't know if that's an ego-driven thing or what it is, but it's damned impressive, and we can only learn from people like that.
Definitely. I just wish he did a commentary for it. He doesn't like doing commentaries, which is a shame. But there is a lot of information out there that you can go research Close Encounters, like books, and Bob Balaban did a really good one, Spielberg, Truffaut, and Me, which is a really good book that Bob Balaban wrote about the making of it. So obviously you get a lot of the stuff about Bob Balaban's experience hanging out with Spielberg and Truffaut. So that's very good. Also, Julia Phillips's You'll Never Eat Lunch in This Town Again, which is to a lesser one than the Bob Balaban book, but it's still very good. So you can piece all this stuff together. And then if you pick up the 4K Blu-ray, it has all 3 versions on it. It's got the 1 hour 40 odd making of. It's got all the trailers and all the extra features and stuff like that in it. There's also a version that you can watch on the Blu-ray, which apparently brings up the footage, so it gives you a little marker as to which version it's in. I haven't gone down that road yet, but I may check that out at some point when I do rewatch the film again.
Yeah.
Well, I think with Close Encounters, I think that the fact that it's an amazing film has been taught in this conversation. So I think that works. So maybe we're not a film school, but we are a film geek school. So I think if you have not seen Close Encounters, what sort of film would they expect if nobody's seen Close Encounters? I would sort of say it's an adult. I don't mean adult as in graphic or sweary or whatever, but it's a film. I think if you set a 6-year-old down, I think they might get bored nowadays, because it's made very differently from films nowadays. So it's a very intellectual film, I think, but not complicated to follow.
If you've never seen Close Encounters before, I guess if you're a fan of movies like Interstellar, as an example, it's nothing, or Contact. This is they're all pretty much cut from the same cloth. For me, it's don't go in expecting any answers. If you are looking for a film that's a coming of age film, in the sense of the child who's become a man but wants to go back to being a child, it's that story a little bit. So if you're in your mid-20s and you feel you've lost something in life, you might find some answers in Close Encounters, because it's all about looking to the wonder of life and not being too adult. So it does have it resonates with people in their early to mid 20s, I would say, for sure. Because that's the age Spielberg was, and I think he made this movie for himself. It's a very personal film. There's a lot of him in it. I think watching the movie, just expect some truth and reality, and don't expect to get all the answers. It's more of a wonder. It doesn't tie everything up and show you everything in great detail. Even when they reveal the aliens at the end, spoiler alert, they're not shown in their totality. They're shown in a mystical way, and I feel it's so good and so justified the way they did it. They didn't do this great CG creature with this or that, or even a great puppet creature. They kind of show, they did a puppet creature, of course, but they kind of show it in a very simplistic way and a very honest way. And you watch it and you feel like, hey, I've touched, for 1 minute, I've touched the hand of God, and by that I mean the alien hand of God, which is also from E.T.
Also for the E.T. poster, isn't it? Yeah. And also there is a resemblance of Puck, which was the affectionate name given to the main alien. There is a resemblance between that alien and obviously E.T., which would come a couple of years after.
If you think of the theme, the hidden theme of the film, when you wish upon a star, it's I hate to say it, Close Encounters in a way is a Disney film.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. It feels very, Roy Neary is very much a Peter Pan sort of character. I mean, look at the state of his house, for God's sake. That's never been cleaned. There's train sets everywhere and there's stuff piled up all over the place. This is before he wrecks it by throwing plants and bricks through his window, trying to make a replica of this thing that he can see in his head, but he doesn't know what it is. But who can't look at a pile of mashed potatoes without thinking, I can't? Maybe that's just me. I don't know. But I always think about him crafting what would become Devil's Tower out of his mashed potatoes.
We've all done it.
Yeah. But to me, it is my favorite film of all time. And, everybody's got a favorite film of all time. I'm not going to say it's the best film that everybody should, it is the best movie ever made. But for me, it's the one movie that I would just take to a desert island and just keep rewatching it over and over again.
Yeah, hopefully they let you have 3 versions on that island.
I'm taking a Blu-ray that I've got, so that's got that. I'll take the book as well.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, so it's been nice to be able to just devote a whole conversation to a single film. I know we've given some other recommendations for similar films, but this has pretty much been, a deepish dive into Close Encounters, and we've just touched the tip of the mountain. There is so much more that we could carry on and just talk for hours and hours and hours. I mean, they write books about the film, for God's sake. So,
Would you like to go to Devil's Tower one day?
I would, but then I wouldn't want to be disappointed by it. I'm not saying I would be, but to look at it on the mountain, it'd be like, oh my God, that is amazing. I would love to go to Devil's Tower, but I would hate to go there and go, what? It's not that big. So that would really break my heart if it was just like, all right, is that what it is? But no, I would like to go at night and watch for a mothership coming out of the ground, wherever it was hidden, and just rising above, and then looking for the R2-D2 that's stuck to the bottom of it.
I get the feeling you wouldn't be disappointed if you went, and I get the feeling you would have goosebumps.
I think I probably would. You would just be like, you're not getting me where I'd climb up it, stay there. I would live there. Just live on the top of Devil's Tower.
Until the aliens came and took you away.
Until the aliens came. As a kid, and even as an adult, to be fair, I would have got on the mothership.
Yeah.
Yep, definitely.
Me too.
So, but yeah, so that concludes our deep dive into the 1977, 1978, if you're in the UK, film Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And just, watch the YouTube. Doesn't sound as good as Watch the Skies, does it?
No.
But Watch the Skies, you're not going to see this video, are you, if you're staring at the sky?
I think people should get off their butts and go out and look at the stars right now.
Yeah. Maybe not now here because it's daylight, so you're not really going to see anywhere I am, but wait till the sun goes down or the grey clouds part or whatever it is, and go look up Look away from your mobile phones. Don't keep
Yes.
looking down. Look up.
That's
There you
true.
go.
There's the message.
Yep. Switch your phone off and go look at the stars.